In this chapter, we're going to learn how to create user-defined methods. We've already seen how to use some of the methods that are part of the C# language, such as WriteLine, and some of the math functions, which is just another word for methods, such as absolute value and square root. But in this chapter, we're going to learn how to create our own. I'm going to put off talking about why we need to create methods and what they bring to our programs, and instead just start off by showing you a simple example of a method definition so that we can learn a little bit of the terminology that I'm going to be using throughout the chapter. So let's get started. First thing we have to know is we have to know where method definitions can go. And method definitions have to go outside of static void main, outside the main program. So we can either put them above main or below. I prefer putting them below, so we'll start out there. We begin a method definition with the keyword static. And for now, just know that when we use static, we're saying that this method definition is not part of a larger class. This method exists on its own. Later in the course, we'll learn how to create classes and methods that exist inside of classes, like WriteLine exists inside the console class. But the methods we're going to create in this chapter exist on their own, so we have to use the keyword static first. After that, we put the return type of the method. Methods return data. That's one of the things that they can do. In this particular example, we're going to create a method called square, which squares a number. And that number is going to be a double, or for the double data type. So the return type of the method is double. After the return type, we have the name of the method. We're going to call this method square, because we're going to use it to square numbers. Your methods should have some sort of mnemonic relationship to what the method does. So squaring a number is called square. Simple enough. Then you type an open parenthesis, and then you enter the data type and a name for the data that you're going to pass into the method. In other words, the number that we're going to square. This variable is actually called a parameter, and we can have more than one parameter for a method if we need to. But since in this particular example, all we're doing is squaring one number, all we need is a single parameter. And that has to consist of the data type and a name for that parameter. Then we drop down and type an open curly brace to begin the definition. Inside the method definition, we simply write whatever code we need to write to perform the operation that the method defines. In this case, to square a number, we multiply it by itself, so we write number times number. Then, because we want that resulting value to be returned to where the method called it, we have what's called a return statement, or the return keyword. This whole statement is called a return statement. And the return statement sends the data from the method back to the calling program. You'll see how that works exactly in just a minute. And I said this was going to be a simple method definition, so that's all we have to do. Lots of times your methods will have multiple lines, but in this case all we need is one single line with the return statement and the number multiplied times itself. Now let's go up to the calling program, to the main program, and see how to call the method once we've created it. So what we're going to do is we're going to create another variable, we'll call it num, and we'll assign it a value 12. Then we want to square that number. To do that, we'll call the method. And we'll just do it inside a simple console WriteLine statement to make it easy. And we'll say num squared is plus, and then we call the method here, square num. Now let's take a minute and look at that. To call a method, we use its name followed by an argument. The argument must match the parameter in number and data type. So in other words, if I have just one parameter in my method definition, then I can only have one argument in my method call. That's what square num is. It's a method call. And that argument has to match by data type. So if my parameter is a double, then my argument must also be a double. Now, a method call can go anywhere that an expression is expected. So I can assign it to a variable, I can use it in a console WriteLine statement, in any place where an expression is expected. You can place a method call. So let's run this program and see what we get. 12 squared is 144, and that's right. So let's review before we move on to the next lesson. Methods are defined outside of the main program. They begin with the keyword static if they don't exist within a class. And for this chapter, none of our methods will exist inside a class, so they're going to all be static methods. Follow that by the data type of the method, and I should mention that methods do not have to have a data type. There are such things as void methods, and we'll look at those later in the course. After the return data type is the name of the method, in this case square, and then what follows that in parentheses is called the parameter list, and that's one or more pieces of data that you're going to pass into the method. And the parameter list always has to be delimited by parentheses. The method body has to exist as a block, so we have to have an opening curly brace and a closing curly brace. Inside the method definition is whatever code you need to perform the task at hand. In this case, to square a number, we multiply it by itself, so we have that code right here. If your method is a value returning method, at some point you have to have a return statement. In this case, the code that we need and the return statement can all exist in one, since this is a simple definition. But at some point in a method definition, a value returning method must have a return statement. Then, to use the method in a program, you simply call it wherever an expression is expected of that data type, if the data type makes a difference. And when you call the method, you must pass an argument that matches the parameter list. So the argument must have the same data type, and there must be the same number of arguments as there are parameters. If you have one parameter, then you can only have one argument. If you have two parameters, you have to have two arguments, and so on and so forth. So that's the basics, the very basics of creating methods. So let's move to the next lesson where we're going to look at some more complex method definitions that involve more than one parameter.